Hey, Brent, welcome back to another episode of Milkshakes Markets Madness. This is our Monday episode, the peak at the week, we call it. And so we are suffering from another case of the Mondays. And before we get your take on the upcoming market data this week, why don't I bring everybody up to speed on what is headed our way, because it is quite a lot. We have more earnings coming from Apple and Amazon. We've been talking a ton about the NASDAQ risk assets, the momentum in tech overall. So that's going to be interesting. Last week we had, I think it was Google and Facebook, and they performed very, very well. So again, if Apple and Amazon come out with some surprise earnings, it seems like the inflation boogeyman is still hovering over us. We also have the PMI index, Purchasing Managers Index, along with the ISM, which is the Institute of Supply Management. It's usually a manufacturing index. This is the non-manufacturing component, so services sector. It's a survey that looks at 400 non-manufacturing businesses. The services side of the economy is one that's been a big narrative all year as far as where we would expect to see signs that growth and inflation are subsiding. We just haven't seen that yet. So that could be a very market-moving indicator. We also have the JOLTS, which is a job openings, or at least the JOLTS job openings report, along with, which is kind of a duality, tug of war, the challenger layoff data. Employment is really what I think the bears are trying to hold on to as the last data set that they can believe in, that once it turns, good old recession is right around the corner. And we also have the ADP employment figures. So all of those things just seem to be working right in line with this somewhat most hated bull market. And then lastly, which bookends very well all this data and the conversation we had this weekend, we have the Eurozone inflation and GDP report and the Bank of England rate decision. Brent, are any of those things you want to take a bite out of first?
Well, I think we also have at the end of the week, we have non-farm payrolls, I believe, unless they've kicked that for a week for some reason. But regardless of whether it is or not, I mean, that's a very big data-filled week. And the reality is, I don't think we're going to see some big change over what we've seen. I think, and I'm not expecting us to just hit the wall one day and all of a sudden everything is awful. But I think the trend has been that data's holding up pretty well, but that inflation and growth is slowing slightly. And I kind of think that is going to continue. But I think to me, it's more like what happens when we get into September or October than it is what happens when we get into Monday or Tuesday. That said, when we get back to, if I really had to pick one out here on the UK, I think is having a lot of troubles, and I think Europe in general is having a lot of troubles. I don't think the UK is immune from that, and I would take it back to where I thought I've said before, where I think problems overseas may be what causes this eventual downturn, which I think we'll have, as opposed to something here in the United States. That said, the one thing that could potentially cause some issues is I think Apple reports this week, and Apple is clearly a big bellwether, right? And if Apple, I think Apple is what, $1.2 trillion market cap now. Like, think about this: the U.S. GDP is like 22 trillion, and if you add up at Apple and nvidia, it's like 2.2 trillion. So two companies are 10% of of the biggest economy in the world. The reason this is important is you think about the valuations here. And again, I'm not a huge value guy. In many ways, I don't think valuation even matters. But when you zoom way out and you think about two companies being worth 10% of the overall biggest economy in the world, if for whatever reason Apple either misses earnings, which I don't expect, or if they just guide lower, or if they say something isn't moving quite as well as everybody seems to think that they have. And if the point is if the leader trips and falls, it's like a bike race. If the guy out front, crashes, all the others end up crashing into him, right? And that is why, even though I'm not necessarily predicting this with Apple. If something were bad to happen with Apple, it can cause a lot of problems, especially when you think about all the things we've talked about on the previous shows, the put call ratios, the VIX being so low, the sentiment being high, nobody being scared, the alligator jaws of the NASDAQ and the 10-year. You start adding all those things up, and then you get an event, and if Apple doesn't say everything perfectly, that's when, it doesn't have to be anything dramatic. They just might say something wrong. The market interprets it a certain way. Now all of a sudden, markets are off to the downside. So I think it's August. A lot of times Augusts are very quiet. Whether it's quiet this year or not, I don't know. But I think this is probably the biggest week of the summer coming up with all the data coming out.
Well, I appreciate that analogy that you provided of the bike race and the big pile up. I can already visualize the thumbnail for this week's episode. But the other thing too here is, I can't believe I missed non-farm payroll when I was looking at the week ahead. It makes me think of, when you have, speaking of milkshakes, when you have a smoothie or a milkshake and it's really, really full of stuff and really, really thick, it's hard to get all, suck all of it up. And this week has been, and it looks like it's going to be jam-packed with stuff. So I apologize for missing non-farm payroll, but man, when you look at the list of things I gave you, the fact that on top of all that, we have non-farm payroll, it's going to be one heck of a week.
And it could be a roller coaster of a week. I mean, you could literally, I think it was 2014. So it might've been like 10 years ago. I don't remember the exact year, but there was a day, and I'm pretty sure it was in August. I should go back and look this up. There was a day where you had 5% moves, a 5% up, 5% down, 5% up, 5% down for 4 days in a row. So 4 5% days in a row. Now, I'm not saying we're going to have that this week, but with this much data and with sentiment and positioning the way it is now, you could have, because there's this big tug of war, right? The bears are, God, this has to turn down. And the bulls are like, screw you, we're going higher. So when you have, when you have this much emotion and in a market, you can get these crazy swings back and forth. So, it'll be interesting to come Friday. It'll be interesting to look back and see how the week played out.
Well, we'll have a midweek update. So if you can dig up that information before then, that would be great. And at that time, we also look forward to hearing what you thought of the Barbie movie. So everyone has something to look forward to in the next couple of days. Brent, thanks for checking in. Have a great week, and we'll talk to everyone soon.
All right, talk to you soon.
This show is provided for entertainment and informational purposes only. It should not be relied upon as legal, business, investment, or tax advice. Neither the hosts, guests, nor any funds they may manage intends to make an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies.